Hello everyone and welcome back yet again to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in to today's show. We have a good slate of segments ahead for you guys. We're going to continue with some betting odds in different sports, updating you guys on those. We'll start off with the Heisman odds, and then we'll follow it up with the Stanley Cup odds as well as we head into the 24-25 NHL offseason and seeing what trades and offseason rumors could be changing the landscape there. And we'll also continue our IDP player profiles with some very exciting players at various positions. So, before we begin, I do want to remind you to like, follow, and subscribe to both the show and the network. It is a huge support to all involved. We also do tend to receive a ton of tips and donations, so if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving them at the link gsmc.cloud. It's again a huge support, both of me, my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as a whole, so anything you leave is greatly appreciated. Also, if you have any burning questions, comments, or concerns about anything related to the show, you can leave them there, and they will be answered and addressed at the beginning of the next episode. Without further ado, let's jump right into what should be an exciting show for you guys today. Let's start off in the world of college football. It makes its triumphant return to the show. I love talking college football, one of my favorite sports, but there's been a shakeup in the Heisman race, and that is what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at how each of the top 10 in terms of betting odds can be the new Heisman, and who can be rising up the ladder and who can be falling down the ladder, and who ultimately, in this very crowded race, this has never been as crowded as it's been in ages, is going to eventually come out on top. So let's jump right into this segment. And we will start off at number 10 with a guy who is a very interesting case, a redshirt sophomore out of Texas A&M. New head coach, but if he's to be the face of this Texas A&M Aggie squad, he really needs to prove his prowess. Last year, we saw some flashes of what he could be. Threw for a little under 1,000 yards in the limited game time he had, and that is Connor Wegman. He, out of all those different Texas A&M quarterbacks that they've had over the years, Haynes King, Zach Calzada, he seems to be the guy who is willing to stick around, develop, even though Jimbo Fisher era did not work out. Mike Elko comes in, and we saw what he all did with Riley Leonard over there at Duke, so it should be a new horizon for the Texas A&M Aggies. However, I don't think they have the personnel, especially on the offensive side of the football, to really keep up with some of the SEC's elite. The only high-profile receiver I can think about right now from them is Moose Muhammad. He's never been in that wide receiver one role. They had a lot of production leave. Evan Stewart obviously went to Oregon. We'll talk about them a little bit later. But I really think in order for Connor Wegman to succeed, he does need at least someone who has a sense of what this offense is all about. I just think that right now, 10 seems a little bit higher for him, and at plus 2,200, those are very long odds, so don't think that I would want to place all my eggs in one basket with Connor Wegman. But I still think he has a lot of potential, and he could be the best quarterback to lead Texas A&M into a new era. And coming in at number 9, definitely is a guy who's going to get a lot of hype. Had quite the journey in his college career, moving from an FCS school to Washington State, and now ending up at Miami. We have Cam Ward. At plus 2,200, I actually like Cam Ward's long odds. This is the best receiver room he's ever had. He has Xavier Restrepo, 1,000-yard receiver last year. Jacoby George showed flashes last year of what he could be, a breakout year. And then they add Houston wide receiver transfer and Samuel Brown. I think that Cam Ward has a lot of upside. We'll have to see how he translates to a more competitive conference in the ACC. 3,735 yards for him, 25 touchdowns, and 7 picks last year, his last at Washington State. He adds that experience. I believe this is his 5th year. And I think that right now, Cam Ward, when I'm looking at all these odds in the same range, he seems like one of the more intriguing options with longer odds who could vault up this kind of leaderboard for the Heisman as the season goes on, because I do believe that Cam Ward definitely has the kind of dark horse potential that can be realized once he fully settles into Miami, and he has the wide receiver room to do it, unlike a Connor Wegman. Coming in at number 8 is a very interesting proposition here, because this guy does not have as much experience as some of the others on this list, and that is Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU. Looks like he's going to be the number 1 option for them going forward. But at plus 2,200, much in the same range as Cam Ward and Connor Wegman, I don't really like his value because I don't know too much about his game. And he's replacing Jaden Daniels. And also, the receiver room is not what Jaden Daniels had either. He does have the experience in Kyron Lacey and CJ Daniels, who's a grad student and redshirt senior respectively. But I'm looking at Garrett Nussmeier, and the only real game that I see was a good one in the Rely Quest Bowl, where he had 395 yards. But it didn't really show me a full season's worth of what Garrett Nussmeier can bring to the table at LSU. And I really don't think that LSU needs to rush into things with him, but I certainly feel as if Garrett Nussmeier is one of those guys who is being picked on blind faith, and mainly because LSU does not necessarily have the hardest SEC schedule out of any of the teams that we're going to talk about later in the segment. They definitely have an easier slate. They do have the experience for him, but right now I feel like LSU needs to realize that they're not going to have swing for the fences seasons every single year. They are one of the more transitional teams who could be primed for a breakout season, but they need to realize that right now they don't necessarily have the assets to maintain a certain level of dominance and good play in order to win the SEC and challenge for a playoff spot. But right now, I think that 8 is a little bit too high, much like with Connor Wegman for Garrett Nussmeier. Coming in number 7 is definitely a guy who's gotten a lot of hype, deservedly so, after his latter half of last season, his first season, as the Alabama Crimson Tide starter. Jalen Milroe. I really love what this kid did in the latter half of the season, because at the beginning of the season, there were a lot of question marks surrounding what Nick Saban would do at the quarterback position for Alabama. Jalen Milroe didn't really separate himself from guys like Ty Simpson and Dylan Lonergan, and it was really a kind of a process of getting him up to speed with the whole way they wanted to play football. But in the latter half of the season, he got going. He really shined. He led many statistics in the latter half of the season, and ultimately Alabama got a deserved CFP spot. And so at plus 1,600, I really like him as another guy whose odds should just go up a little bit more. And looking at the Alabama receiver room, they did lose a lot of production. They lose Bond and Nye Black. They add Jeremy Bernard from new coach Kalen DeBoer's University of Washington team, who didn't really have a chance in that crowded wide receiver room over there. And they have Kobe Prentice still, who has shown flashes of brilliance, but at his best is just a very decent wide receiver too. And so I'm really looking at Jalen Milroe as a make it or break it kind of year for him, because I really like what Alabama did with him last year, but this year seems a bit different because there's going to be a lot more pressure on getting it right for new head coach Kalen DeBoer. I really like what he's doing. He's pushing all the right buttons, but it has to translate onto the field. And I think Jalen Milroe has a good shot at truly becoming even better due to what Kalen DeBoer teaches him as well. His offense could really pop if all the pieces fit together. Coming in number 6, another guy who is really a question mark at plus 1,600. Another guy who should have a bit longer odds in this race. Nico Yamalieva, another kind of redshirt freshman guy who comes into Tennessee. A lot of question marks surrounding him. He does have the profile of being a former 5-star. They talk about him highly, but I just haven't seen it yet on the field. He's much like Garrett Nussmeier, a little bit like Connor Wegman, but Connor Wegman is more proven. I just don't see why Nico Yamalieva has the 6th best odds in this race when there are guys who have proven themselves Maybe it's because most of those guys have transferred, but Nico Yamalieva certainly feels like I need to see more of him. He did have a decent bowl game where he showed his dual threat abilities, but I need something to hold on to see. In like at least a 3 to 5 game sample of Nico Yamalieva and his play to truly grasp where he stands in this Heisman race. And that's really all I can say about him at the moment. He has all the intangibles. He has the 5-star rating, but he needs to put it all together. Coming in at number 5, that was probably my favorite guy on this board. I was a big fan of the Big 12 when Texas was still there. They were my team. And this guy really was a nuisance for just his calm and composure and ability to deliver when called upon. Will Howard transfers to Ohio State, immediately steps into that QB1 position at plus 1,600 again. I really like Will Howard because he's not really going to be asked to do too much. If you look at his receiver room, it might be the best in college football, even with the absence of Marvin Harrison Jr. as he's now gone to the NFL. I still have Emeka Egbuka, who has the potential to be a very solid wide receiver one, fantastic route running abilities. You have Jeremiah Smith, who's been turning heads in spring practice, the freshman. And you have Carnell Tate, another freshman. There's a lot of excitement surrounding this team. And Will Howard, all he had to do was just be a steady presence. Kind of much like what Kyle McCord was last year. Being a guy who can deliver the football to his playmakers without, moving the structure of the team. That's all that needs to be said. So at plus 1,600, I really like the value here for Will Howard in terms of betting odds. Coming in number 4 is a guy who's kind of been going under the radar, in my humble opinion, in the SEC. And Jackson Dart, with all the talk about Carson Beck versus Quinn Ewers and stuff of that nature, people forget about Jackson Dart over at Ole Miss. He obviously did have a fantastic running back last year in Quinton Judkins, and they formed a dynamic duo in the backfield. But this year, I think that Jackson Dart's true talent to be realized. He threw for over 3,300 yards last year. I still think at plus 1,500, Jackson Dart could be in the reckoning to at least be in the top 3 for the Heisman odds. He has a solid receiving core in Trey McCann, Antoine Wells, Jordan Watkins add that experience and the 1,000-yard experience, most importantly. So Jackson Dart is no shortage of targets. He really is one of those guys who shouldn't be forgotten about in the SEC. But, of course, he's behind these two guys named Beck and Ewers, and we have to talk about them. Coming in at number 3 is, of course, Quinn Ewers, moving to the SEC with Texas. I really liked the way he improved last year. Over 3,400 yards for him, 22 touchdowns, 6 picks. He really elevated his game, but the question mark this year is, will those transfer portal additions that Texas made truly replace guys like Latavion Sanders, guys like Jonathan Brooks, guys like A.D. Mitchell, guys like Xavier Worthy, guys like so on and so forth, Jordan Whittington? Who will step up to replace them? They added Isaiah Bond and Amari Niblack. I thought that was very nice pickups. They add Silas Bolden from Oregon State, Matthew Golden from Houston, and top it all out, they have 5-star recruit Ryan Wingo waiting in the wings. So it's all set up very nicely for Quinn Ewers. But I think that this season is all about his consistency. I want to see him be more consistent and comfortable in this offensive system. And so I'm looking ahead to see what Quinn Ewers is going to do for this Texas offense now that they're in the SEC. And he has stiff competition because at number 2 is Carson Beck. Carson Beck, a metronomic presence for Georgia, kind of in that Stetson Bennett mold, but a little bit more consistent, more of a pocket passer, in my humble opinion. But at plus 800, he has very good odds. 3,941 yards last year. His 86 QBR was 5th in the nation. Also led the nation in completion percentage. So just that level of consistency. However, when his wide receiver room is stripped bare, I do want to see what he does with lesser talent. Because gone is guys like Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, even a guy like Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. And now comes in Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas. These two unproven guys. They add Benjamin Urosek from Stanford in their tight end room. They already have Oscar Delp. But I do think that Carson Beck may look a bit more vulnerable, but he still should be that guy who's calm and composed in the pocket and will elevate this team. But there's a new number one in town, a new sheriff in town at the number one spot in terms of these Heisman rankings. He's not in the SEC. He's not in the Big 12. He's in the Big 10, a new Big 10 team, and a new quarterback for this Big 10 team, replacing the great Bo Nix in Dillon Gabriel. When all is said and done, this guy could be one of, if not the best, college football quarterbacks of the past 2 decades. 10,000 yards throughout his illustrious career, whether it be at UCF or Oklahoma. At plus 750, I really like Dillon Gabriel, especially now that he's not on one of my rival teams. 3,660 yards last year, 30 TDs in his final season at Oklahoma. Really a huge part of why the Venables era was semi-successful. But Dillon Gabriel, when all is said and done, should be the kind of guy you're talking about at the top of Heisman odds. He goes into an Oregon room that has Tez Johnson, very exciting player. They have Evan Stewart, the transfer in from Texas A&M, was talking about. I really like what they're building over in Oregon. And Dan Lanning is the kind of coach that will get the best out of Dillon Gabriel. And I really like him, which would be his final year in college football, to go out into the sunset, potentially as a Heisman Trophy winner, because I think he deserves it. It's hard to say as a Texas fan because of what he did with Oklahoma, but I truly believe that he's a special kid. That should just about do it for this segment of today's show. Coming next, we do our first IDP player profile of the day with one of the most fearsome defensive ends, definitely the most tattooed defensive ends in the league. If you've been watching, we're just got things like receiver and seeing this guy's face pop up, you'll definitely know who it is. We'll be back to talk about him after the break on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign.